f1, an excellent move, and the break f3 is assured by these means. Okay, rook comes to g6. Rook a d1. Now, possibly that is a small mistake. I think rook a c1 has been recommended for white in this position as a much better move, denying the black queen access to c2. For instance, if black takes on f3 now, white takes with the rook. And now, unlike the game, black can't put his queen on c2. Meanwhile, white's improved the position of the rook on a1. So, for instance, what would happen now? Well, black might play queen e4. Then comes pawn to d6. g4, basically, if black cannot break through to the white king now, he's toast. Rook f4, everything's protected. Queen comes back to e6. And now white tries to snuff out the black counterplay. Takes on g4. Queen takes g4, and now the bishop comes back to f4. With once again a clear advantage for white. He's a piece down, but black can barely move anything here. White can easily defend his king side. For instance, if he goes h3, well, let's see, can we not even play queen g5 check? That's one of the main ideas. The pieces come off, and eventually black's going to be powerless to prevent the queenside pawns touching down. So that would have been a safer move, going back to the game, than Spassky's rook a d1. Okay, he takes, rook takes queen c2, rook d2, and now queen to c3. A reciprocal mistake by Bukic, because in the bulletin after the event, it was mentioned that queen b1 check is actually a much better move here. And the main point of that is that when white plays rook f1, black can take on b4, and things are not so clear anymore. Because after rook b2, black goes queen c3. Pawn to d6, rook to a6, e4, queen c1 check, rook f1, queen c3, queen d5. It's much easier for white to improve his pieces than black. Knight comes to f6, and now crunching final move, rook takes f6, ensuring the advance, the winning advance of the pawn on d6. So although there are a few glitches towards the end, this is an excellent demonstration of how white may break through to black's queenside in the London system. Well, we've seen Kasparov and Spassky using white so far. What could be a better recommendation than that? The third illustrative game features Grandmaster Vlatko Kovacevic from Yugoslavia. I would say he's the only Grandmaster who uses the London system and has used the system frequently and commonly over a period of decades for the white pieces. He's won many key games with this system. And here we see a smash, a complete annihilation of a fellow Grandmaster, Hans Ray from Holland. This game was played in Maribor in 1980. It's by no means a great game by black, but what it does indicate is the danger that black faces if he's at all careless against white's innocuous-looking setup. Now, here we see black employing a Queen's Gambit-like setup against the London system with the black pieces. Very, very solid. Pieces coming out. Bishop to e7, nothing fancy. But white is also developing very logically. Bishop comes out to f4. Now he arranges the pawn triangle c3, d4, e3, complementing his bishops perfectly and preparing the move bishop to d3. After which white's developed all his minor pieces and now can look forward to the rest of the game with confidence. And here black, I would say, plays an imprecision in the move order. Although it's a move that many players will play, not realising the danger inherent in white's opening setup. Black castles. Now, why could this natural move be such a blunder in this position? Well, basically because it encourages white to start a virulent kingside attack. Now, bishop d3, again, disguising white's intentions to a certain degree, doesn't look anything special, just looks like a natural development of the bishop to the most active square, fair enough. Black continues to develop. And doubtless, given time, black is going to get a good game by playing moves like b6, bishop b7, possibly rook to c8. But white interrupts all of that plan by going pawn up to h4. Now, you might not like that, you know, all-out play with white. So a very good alternative in this position is knight e5, restricting black. If black takes on e5, white's very happy to take with either the pawn or the bishop. But in either case, the strategy is the same. White's got ideas of queen f3, queen to h3. This is a very common idea in this system. Possibly white's looking forward to playing f2 to f4, establishing a superior version of the stone wall. And also after knight takes e5 by black, white can consider taking with the pawn. And if knight comes back to d7, well, you know, white might play queen h5 anyway, forcing a concession, and then either queen h6 or queen h3. Either way, white's chances look preferable to me in this position after knight e5. But Kovacevic, as I say, on that particular day, decided to play h4. All right, b6 anyway, knight e5. Knight takes e5, and with the added oomph given to white's position by h4, Kovacevic feels it's time to take with the d-pawn. It seems that Ray's sense of danger left him on this day. Kovacevic had assessed Ray very carefully before the game and decided that he wasn't the world's greatest defender. I mean, even grandmasters have strong and weak points, you know, and you've got to try and find these points. So maybe Kovacevic thought to himself, well, Ray's a bit careless in the opening. Sometimes he can play very natural moves which aren't necessarily good. He might underestimate this system. And it seems that's exactly what happened here, because now white was able to go crunching through with the move bishop takes h7. Of course, when one plays such a move, one would normally be able to follow that up with knight to g5 check, followed by queen to h5. The interesting thing is here that after black takes, as he must, white gets to play the standard attack in a slightly different order than normal. The knight comes round and obviously creates the very dangerous threat of knight to g5, which Ray feels compelled to stop by playing f6. There may have been better defensive moves for black there, but his position is most unenviable. I think a lot of players would go the way Ray does in this game, simply going down to the natural attack. They can't see what to do. They hate their position. They play bad moves as a result. And so it's very easy to put them away. And it turns out that f6 did not stop knight g5 after all. In fact, this is an incredibly strong move. And black must take. Now white takes, revealing a further point to h4. I mean, it really is quite simple. White's threatening g6 followed by mate on either h7 or h8. Rook f5, making room for the king. Queen h7 check, getting out of the pin. King f7. Well, black could try king f8 in this position, but unfortunately that move loses immediately to the intermezzo queen to g6, threatening rook h8 check, and of course if king back to g8, queen takes e6, rook to f7, g6. It really is very, very simple to play the attack here. White's attack runs on oiled wheels. g6 check, everything comes with tempo. Queen takes g7. And now the pawn on g6 suddenly becomes a game-winning pawn in its own right. Whereas before white was only threatening mate, only I say, so black can probably defend against one idea. Here white's got two ideas. He wants to threaten mate and he's also threatening to queen that pawn. And it turns out black's position is so jammed up he can't defend against the twin threats. So bishop f8. Well, what else did black have? Well, he can put either his rook or his knight on f8. After rook f8, it's very simple. White plays rook h8, threatening queen to f7, checkmate. Black may try knight f8 instead. Queen comes to h8. Black does a runner, and it really is very simple. The g-pawn is just queening after the most easy sequence in the world. So back at the game now. Bishop f8 was played. Queen h8. Rook g5, desperately trying to stop the passed pawn. Queen to g8. That's a move that could be missed. But queen f7 mate is a threat, as well as queen takes e6. And if black plays queen e7, then simply bishop takes g5. So knight takes e5, a last desperate throw of the dice. Bishop takes e5. So king d7, rook h8, bishop b7, queen h7 check. And in this position, black decided to resign. g7 comes next. So I think we can see this game in two ways. We could see it as just an annihilation. He didn't really understand the position. He got smashed as a result. We could also see it as a very logical continuation of White's very coherent opening play. Simplicity, not blocking in any pieces, quickly developing the remaining pieces, and then noting Black's small imprecision castles, which, let's face it, a lot of players are going to make, then comes crashing through with h4 and the Greek gift sacrifice on h7, a sacrifice which, as it turned out, Black was powerless to stop. I mean, the fact that Black maybe could have defended slightly better in the middle is, to my mind, irrelevant. What White is setting the scene for is a Black mistake, and that's the way you win chess games. Well, we now turn to that part of the DVD where we consider Black's most common responses to your opening of the Queen's pawn. I mean, 50% of the time he's going to play d5. Most of the rest of the time he's going to play one knight f6. And so it's as well to know the game plan after both these moves. Now, the next game we're going to look at is a game between Moldovanenko and Butsenko. It comes from the Odessa Championship in 2001, and it's an excellent example of how White establishes a superior opening formation against this particular Black setup. Now, of course, in this game, Butsenko plays 2e6. Another move worth consideration from Black's point of view is c5. The main point of which is to open up vistas for the Queen, and notably Queen b6 might become a possible threat. Anyway, White is not too bothered by that. He plays e3. This is the game Rowson versus Bischoff, Germany 2005. And Bischoff takes on d4. Of course, Black can play the Queen out to b6 in this position. Not especially effective due to the excellent move knight c3. It turns out that Black hasn't got enough time to take on b2, because then simply knight takes d5 is very strong indeed, threatening all sorts of ideas on c7 and rook b1's, threatening the Queen. So perhaps that's why Black takes on d4 in this game. But White quickly builds up a very good position with simple moves. Actually, we've transposed to an obscure variation of the Caro-Kann, an exchange variation where White played bishop f4 early. Not at all bad for White, and in fact White has been winning quite a few games with this system in recent master play, mainly I think because it's very easy to understand. White just develops his pieces, he castles, he's got a clear plan of playing his rook to e1 eventually. Here Rowson feels the top priority is to try and expose Black's pawn structure, and with very, very simple means builds up a pretty good position. And now Queen to d2. White must be at least slightly better here due to the punctured Black kingside. But in Moldovanenko versus Butsenko, just going back, Black played e6. Now comes e3, knight f6, knight d2. And here we see White setting up the familiar pawn triangle. Knight to c6, bishop comes out to d3, bishop d6. And this will be, I would say, another very common response when you play the London system against them. They're going to challenge your bishop, they're going to hunt it down. Now White has two essential approaches in this position. Unfortunately, if the knight's on f3 in this type of position, White's hand is forced. He's probably got to play bishop back to g3. That's not so bad, but keeping the knight on g1 gives White extra options, as we're about to see. And here, a very interesting move is to play f4, establishing a stonewall position. Now, under normal circumstances, the stonewall's not a particularly dangerous opening. When White's gotten rid of his bad bishop on c1, and all his pieces can develop themselves coherently, then the stonewall becomes a much more attractive prospect from White's point of view. There are two good things about this position. White's development is very coherent. He's strong pointing the square e5. This is a key square in this type of position. White's knight is heading for e5. And once that knight reaches e5, The knight is the linchpin for a future possible kingside attack by white. In general, the stone wall's a very aggressive formation and sets the scene for a kingside attack, as we'll see here. I mean, black doesn't defend half badly in this game, but gets down by a terrific kingside assault. And the other main point I think about this position is the remaining bishops on the board. White's bishop is much more active than black's bishop. And this is another big point in white's favour. Anyway, for the time being, the game continues. Black's nursing a slight disadvantage. But it's very instructive to see the way white builds up the kingside attack. And king h1, well, we might have been expecting queen h5. We might have been expecting queen f3. But you have to ask yourself, why did black play knight e8? And the main idea behind this move is I think that black wants to play either f6 or f5, trying to blunt the effect of the bishop on d3. So white is anticipating that move when he plays king h1. And should black play f5, then white is looking to lever open the position with the help of the move g4. So king h1 is a natural precursor to that move. Rook g1 follows, then g4 maybe. So king h1 is an interesting move. Okay, black doesn't like the idea of white playing g4 and plays f6. But now comes the queen out to h5. Very easy to play this move. g6, very natural defence. Queen comes into h6. And now black plays his knight to g7. Possibly threatening to hassle the white queen with knight f5. So g4. A model build-up from white here. Alright, black tries to reinforce the king side. What is noticeable for me about this position is that black is simply defending. He's not creating any chances of his own. He's just massing his forces on the king side and hopes that he can weather the storm. But as is usual in chess, when you're only defending, when you're not doing anything other than that, the pressure mounts and a mistake invariably follows. This is why a defensive strategy in chess is so rare at the highest level, because it's simply not a game winner. You don't win games like that. You win games by creating pressure. And defending, well, that doesn't really create much pressure against the opponent. It just helps him. So white is able to build up in an unhurried fashion. He just swings all his pieces over to the king side, and now he's simply trying to find the best way through. Black finally manages to create some counterplay with the help of b4. White takes, so as not to get a weak backward pawn on c3, and continues to swing his pieces into the assault with rook g3. Of course, the main question is, how does white break through? It's all right to mash your pieces on one side of the board. Eventually, you're going to have to do something. And I think knight g1 is really the key to the whole process, freeing up h3 square for the rook. And it's not at all easy to see how black is going to defend the square h7 in the long term. Well, in fact, black decides, taking a look around the position, that he's not going to be able to do that. And thus he tries to find the most effective way of countering white's inevitable pressure against h7. I mean, whether bishop b5 is the very best way to do it, I don't know. But certainly black's got to do something. And the main idea of exchanging off the light squared bishops is to try to create avenues into white's position to maybe create pressure against the white king. And so just when black is about to create some meaningful counterplay, it's now time to find the winning move. And white comes up with a real cruncher here. Instead of taking on h7, which is what a lot of players would do, let's face it, white now plays the brilliant move knight e5. Fantastic move. Now white is threatening to demolish black's entire kingside by taking on h7 and then taking on g6 and so on. Knight e5 also prevents the black queen from coming into d3. So two things with one move, black must accept. But after f takes e5, we now see that white is threatening mate on the move. Well, it's virtually unstoppable unless black re-sacrifices his piece, which he has to by going knight ef5. But of course now we see that white has very successfully opened up the position. He's found the key to opening up the game. His next move is also very instructive. I mean, white can take on f5 whenever he wishes. Rook h6, and suddenly black is completely demolished. The counterplay comes too little too late. It really is much simpler now for white to play this final attack. Everything falls. well, black can virtually resign this. I mean, he played e takes f5. Let's just see. He could try queen e4 check, but then just rook g2. And white is crawling all over black's king. So going back to the game now, g takes f5, e takes f5, and then very simply queen h7. Check concludes proceedings. A check on f6 will follow, the knight will drop. Nothing left for black other than to resign. So another very powerful demonstration of the kingside attack by white, encouraging for all of us. You know, that's how the white position can respond in the right hands with the right treatment. It's very interesting to see how certain grandmasters have incorporated the London system into their overall repertoire as a surprise weapon. I mean, I guess the stronger you get in chess, the broader your repertoire has to be. And now we're going to see a game between Jonathan Rowson, 3 times British champion, very strong player from Scotland. He's playing in the British Championship in Douglas, the Isle of Man, 2005. And he's playing Thomas Nixon, a dangerous young player, but of course nowhere near Rowson's strength. Rather than play down a main line against Nixon, Rowson prefers to use the London system. And by doing this, I would say he, again, poses the question to black. Well, how are you going to create counterplay? I'm a much better player than you. All I'm going to do is to get a safe position out of the opening with a clear idea of where I'm going. And then how are you going to match me in this type of game? Rowson's very happy to use the London system, and in the last 2 or 3 years has been doing so with great success. I mean, he virtually wins all his games with this system. And he just seems to find the right moment in the tournament to land this surprise on the right opponent. And so, even if you're a grandmaster watching this DVD, you know, you can learn from this approach. And I think using the London system on a sporadic basis, almost like guerrilla warfare, you hit them when they're not expecting it. This would be a very effective way of improving your results. Now, of course, at a lower level, where, you know, your repertoire doesn't need to be so broad. You don't need to have a whole stack of main lines and novelties at your disposal. You won't be coming into contact with opponents who are going to prepare for you specifically on any given day. And so you can use the London system on a more regular basis. And thus this game has added interest because we see how white can demolish the average 2200 player with just the most easy moves you could possibly imagine that could be played here. Now, here we see the basic setup. 2 points to notice. Black is deliberately delaying the development of the bishop on c8 because he's waiting for white to play bishop d3. And when white plays bishop d3, black intends to go bishop a6, exchanging off that bishop. So that's an idea you have to be aware of. But Rowson's alert to this. Knight comes out to f3, knight bd7, knight e5, again delaying the development of the bishop on f1. Knight takes, d takes, knight d7, pawn up to h4. And again interesting from my point of view is that Nixon is not repeating the error that Ray made earlier. He's not castling early. So how should white play against this particular black setup? I mean, the black setup looks very similar to those we've already examined, but he's avoiding repeating the error that black made in the 2 previous games. He's not castling. So what should white do against this particular plan? Well, it's very interesting to see that Rowson continues to avoid moving his bishop on f1 and plays the very good move now, the incisive move, queen to g4. And suddenly, immediate pressure is put on black. He doesn't want to play g6 in this position because that would run straight into h4, h5. If he castles, bishop h6 follows. And so, without loss of face, black has got to play bishop f8. And he's basically saying to white when he plays that move, well, my position's solid enough to withstand any blow. What are you going to do? And e4 is the answer. It's always an important moment when one or other player opens up the game. And here white has got to open up the game, or black's just going to recuperate. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. Black's going to just play moves like bishop b7, queen c7, or maybe queen e7. After queen e7, he can maybe consider f5. Gradually, black is going to claw his way back into the game. So white tries to hit black and create pressure whilst black is still undeveloped. I mean, let's face it, white is going to be able to castle very quickly, much quicker than black. Well, with e4, white is starting to mount pressure. And when you're mounting pressure, like I say, it's very important to open up the game. So e takes d5 is the logical follow-up. E takes d5, and only now, when black has moved that bishop on c8, does Rowson develop the bishop to d3. And now the light square bishop is able to take up an excellent post. All right, queen e7. Castles. Another key moment. White played h4. You wouldn't expect him to castle short so early, but here, castle short seems right. And now rook e1 and e6 is certainly going to follow if black does nothing. So Nixon decides, well, I better get my king out of the middle, and plays castles on the queen side. Rook fe1. h6. And now the crunching blow, pawn up to e6. And already I would say white has established a winning position. Why? Because he's got all his pieces in the game, and black's pieces on the back rank are as yet completely ineffective, particularly the rook on h8 and particularly the bishop on f8. So they say don't kick a man when he's down. Well, unfortunately in chess that's exactly the right thing to do. When a man is down, you've got to kick him and you've got to finish him off. That's the only way, correct way to play the game. So in comes the other rook. White completes development. Black can't see anything to do. It's a typical scenario for the black player when he plays against the London system. Tries a few random hits against the white pieces, but really there was nothing left for black to do other than to resign this position. He's a pawn down and he's losing material. So if you just play through this game at speed, this looks like a very, very simple win for white, which in fact it was, but it's never quite that simple when we come to play this type of game ourselves. A few move order nuances had to be observed in this game. Firstly, the delay developing the bishop on f1. Then the move e4, leaving open the position. White had to time the opening of the position correctly. Rowson's a strong game master. He knows exactly what he's doing. This is why he plays the London system on a regular basis. He can get the type of position he likes at no risk and go on to generate excellent play. Now it's a fact that the Slav defence has become a very popular response to the queen's pawn, and Slav defence setups, that's to say where black plays with d5 and c6, are very, very common against all flank openings. So when you play the London system as white, you can expect to have either a symmetrical setup like the one we see before us, or something with c6 chucked in, played against you very, very commonly. And you have to know how to play against this particular setup. To illustrate what I think white should be doing, I've chosen a full game and a fragment of a game between, first of all, Chernyshov and Tomczak. This was played in the Krakow Open in the year 2003. Here we see the basic position before us. Black can tinker with the move order. He can play c6 early, but white's setup quite often comes to the same idea. At some stage along the line, white's got to play with the move c4. White chooses the right moment to go back into a Queen's Gambit-like setup. He's going to do that at his convenience. But without the move c4, you're not going to get any purchase on black's position. Black's just going to be able to develop very easily, very comfortably. That's why the Slav defence is so popular. It's an economical answer to the problems posed by 1d4. In the basic position before us, white has two good choices in my view. Now in the game Chernyshov versus Tomczak, white played knight bd2 here, which doesn't look like much, but well, just see the sort of position it reaches. If you don't like that, you can play c4 instead. And this was the continuation in the very instructive game Kovacevic versus Byrne, played in Vikensay 1980. Just to show you the essential difference between the modern game that we're looking at, in Kovacevic-Byrne, white played his knight to c3, knight to b to d7. And there's the Slav set up before us. And you might not think white has very much against this particular idea, but he's got two possible advantages. Firstly, he's got a more dynamic pawn position. The white pawns there on d4 and c4 are pretty solid. White's got the pawn lever, c takes d5 at his disposal. He's also got the interesting idea of pushing this pawn onto c5 at some point. That's also a very common idea in this line, and then following up with b4. So these possibilities, in my view, give white an edge. There's also one thing I haven't mentioned, and that's the move queen b3, which is a typical idea against setups where black moves the bishop on c8 early. And in Kovacevic-Byrne, white indeed did play queen b3. Now black could play queen c8 in this position, but then he runs into the simplest of moves, rook c1. And then already, in view of white's threat of c takes d5, white has established at least a small edge here. The queen on c8 is passive and misplaced. So for the most part, black's going to have to play queen b6, and this is precisely what happened in Kovacevic-Byrne. But against that, white now reveals one of the main points of playing c4 in the first place. He's able to play the advanced c5. He's gaining space, forcing off the queens, and now setting up the idea of b4, b5. Now white cannot be allowed to play b4, b5 and then b takes c6 in this position, saddling black with a backward c-pawn. If that happened, if black allowed this, white would already be threatening to take over the game decisively by after that playing rook to a6 or bishop a6, bishop b7. Any way you look at it, black would have severe problems defending his backward pawn at c6. So Byrne's next few moves in this position are designed to take the sting out of white's advance. Please note that in this position white is still threatening b5 because the rook on a8 would be pinned against the pawn on a6. So that's why Byrne plays the peculiar looking rook c8. But now Kovacevic plays in a model fashion for this line. Firstly comes h3, not only creating a retreat square for the bishop, but also threatening to expand on the king side by playing g4. And white should not be too worried about playing this expansionist idea,